There's no one definition of what leadership is. You have to understand what it is that the challenge that you face requires.
Presidents have to decide, are they going to be mirrors of who we are, or are they going to be molders?
Leadership can't happen when everybody's moving in the same direction. You can't really show leadership if everybody's already moving in the direction you want people to go. That's not leadership. That's going with the flow.
You have to connect to the people that you are leading.
What do I do that is right for the country, not right for me politically?
That's a look at the new Yahoo News 13-part series that's out today. It's called When Presidents Lead. And joining us now is the editor-in-chief of Yahoo News, Daniel Kleidman. Also, as you saw, one of the historians featured in the series, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's out with a new book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. It is out today. Good morning to you both. Congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the series. We were actually talking about presidential leadership last week at this time with Bob Woodward as he related it to what's happening in the current White House. And he sort of said that leadership, in a way, remains an underrated presidential characteristic because it's a little bit intangible. It's difficult to measure, but it might just be the most important.
Without a question, it's the most important. I think what we're feeling today and the anxiety and the sense of breaking news and not having a sense to keep up with what's happening is an absence of leadership. I mean, what leadership is, you pull your team together, you're working toward a common cause. You have a temperament that's able to share credit for success, to take blame when something goes wrong. You can control your emotions. You've got humility, you've got empathy, you've got resilience. We know what those qualities are, temperamental qualities. They've made the leaders in the past. And I think the reason we're feeling this sense today is that we don't feel them. There's such chaos here in Washington. I think if history has a passion for me, it's to tell people we've been through these terrible times before. We can get through them again if we have leaders and if the citizens are active. And we don't need to feel like this is the end. We're never going to go back to what we once had. We're going to go back there someday.
All right, that's an encouraging note. So, Daniel, why did you want to take on this question of leadership? Your first episode out today is about FDR. You've got all the A-listers in it. You got Doris, you got Meacham. Why did you focus on FDR first?
Well, look, first of all, Doris used the team metaphor, which is, I think, exactly the right one. In our introductory essay, we talk about this is not about presidents putting boards up, putting points up on the board for their own team. It's about transcending partisanship and bringing the country together and to doing things for the whole country. Well, look, FDR, because he faced the greatest challenge in the 20th century, and he summoned all of his talents to be able to meet that challenge. And Doris, in her books, talks about some of those characteristics that you need for leadership: ambition, moral purpose, a kind of selflessness, which sometimes seems a little contradictory with ambition, but sometimes those things have to go together. And FDR exemplified all of those qualities, and of course, an ability to bring the country together.
Joe?
Yeah, Doris, sometimes we'll exaggerate the crises that leaders faced. I'm not talking about you, but just we have a natural tendency to tell the story so the punchline's so much greater. But the man you have on the cover, Abraham Lincoln, I think we've actually glossed over just how turbulent his times were. Very few Americans realize that in 1864, in the spring of that year, he wasn't even sure his own party was going to give him the nomination to run for re-election. It was a war without end, and Lincoln thought that he was going to be a one-term failed president.
You're absolutely right, Joe. In fact, that's a forgotten part, I think, of the Lincoln story, because we somehow look at how tough it was when he first came in. The Civil War is just beginning. He said, if I'd ever thought it was going to be as difficult as this, I wouldn't have thought I could have lived through it. But then he goes through that same period of crisis in 1864, especially in the summer. So many thousands of people have died. There's a sense of paralysis that we haven't been able to capture Lee's army. Grant is stuck in Virginia. And they come to him, the Republicans come to him, and they say, there's no way you're going to win in the fall unless you're willing to compromise on emancipation. If you start peace talks and you say, well, we'll just go back to the Union, forget emancipation for now, you can win, otherwise you'll lose. And he said, I wanted to win so much. It would be an affirmation of my leadership. But he said, I would be damned in time and eternity if I turned the black soldiers back into slavery. So they leave, and they're so disconsolate, and then chance comes into play, which often happens. Atlanta is taken, the whole mood of the North changes, and he wins the election. But he won it with emancipation and union intact, his twin goals, because he had the courage at that moment. Those are the moments you look for in a leader, when they put the ambition for the country, this is partly what you were saying, above the ambition for the self. It always starts with the self. Ambition has to be there, but then sometimes it gets transferred to some bigger fulfillment, and it did with old Abe Lincoln, for sure.
So what did Abraham Lincoln have that moved him? I mean, he was very pragmatic at the start of the war. He said, "My only goal is preserving the Union. If that means half slave, half free, I will do that." And yet he moved from 61 through 64 to a point where he was willing to sacrifice all and a lot of American lives to free slaves. What was it about him?
Well, what he finally realized was that the Union that he was trying to preserve could never really be the Union that he wanted it to be or the country needed it to be unless slavery was part of the equation. At the beginning, he thought he had nothing he could do about slavery because it was ensconced in the Constitution in the states. But then as he went to visit the soldiers, he would go to the active battlefield day after day because he wanted to talk directly to the people who were fighting. And he began to see how the Confederate were being helped enormously by slaves who were helping their cause. So he goes to the soldiers' home that summer and he starts to think. He would wrestle with thought. And he realized, I am a commander-in-chief. Military necessity can help me to end slavery because I can argue that the slaves are helping the Confederates. So to balance that out, if we end slavery, it will help us as a military necessity. And then once he issued that Emancipation Proclamation, got his team around him, half the team thought it was a terrible thing. The other half thought he should have done it right away. Then it became a part of him. He said, if ever my soul, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he said, if ever my soul were in an act, it is in this act. But his hand was shaking because that morning he had shaken 1,000 hands at a New Year's reception. So he puts the pen down. He said, I cannot sign with a shaking hand, or posterity will say he hesitated. So he waited and waited until he could sign with a bold, clear hand. And he said at that moment that this act is where everything that he has done will come to rest upon. He had been in a near suicidal depression many years before, and his best friend had been with him. And he brings his best friend back. He said, remember that talk when I thought that my life was coming to an end, and I said that I wanted to live so that at least something I did could be remembered by. Maybe with this act, my dream has come true. So it became a part of who he was, and he never went back on it, never for a moment.
You know, Daniel, as we talk about leadership, and we've talked principally about two great leaders in our history, Lincoln and Roosevelt, both of these leaders knew that what they were going to be asked to do. Lincoln knew he knew he was going to be asked to preserve the Union. Roosevelt knew that we were already immersed in the Great Depression. He was going to be asked to lead the nation out of the Depression. But there's another type of leadership that when it happens, when it is dropped on you, like Lyndon Johnson, the President of the United States is assassinated in Dallas, Texas, and he becomes President of the United States. And he has got to lead the nation through mourning and then through progress.
Absolutely. And Lyndon Johnson's a great example because, you know, his great moment of leadership, which we show in this video series, is civil rights and passing the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Most people may not know that when he was in the Senate, he voted with segregationists. He was not a great civil rights leader. But after Kennedy was assassinated, LBJ realized that he needed to bring the country behind a big cause. And he's a classic example of someone who acted to start with on the basis of ambition. He wanted to do great things. It was not necessarily a case of selflessness or even necessarily moral purpose at first. But over time, that's what it became. And through his you know, amazing legislative abilities and his force of personality, he was able to bring the country together. And at the end of the day, the historian John Darman in our series, in our LBJ video, says he became ultimately the most important Democratic president when it came to racial equality and civil rights. And he met the moment.
How we would have loved to have heard that, if only he had heard that before he died. There was such sadness in him in that last couple
Well,
of
that's the
years.
tragedy of his presidency. Is at the end, it was overwhelmed by Vietnam.
Yeah.
Although I think history will remember him for what he did on civil rights.
Doris, one of the most overused words in political analysis these days seems to be unprecedented, that we've never been here before, that these times are unique. It's never been as bad as you say. These are not the worst of times for all the reasons Mike just laid out, from Lincoln to FDR up to LBJ. A hopeful note for our viewers today. What can good and strong leadership do in a moment where the country feels like it's going this way?
I think it's a combination of the leader and the citizens. When you think about all the changes that took place for social justice, Abraham Lincoln said, I don't want to be called the liberator. It's the anti-slavery movement that did it all. It's the progressive movement that got to FDR and Teddy Roosevelt, the civil rights movement without which Lyndon Johnson could not have done what he did, the women's movement, the gay movement. So we as citizens have to realize we have responsibility for the situation we're finding ourselves in right now. That's why I feel that there's a passion for history. I have to tell people we can do something. All these situations, it was the citizen and the leader working together. And that sense of not being a spectator, not just going through the breaking news, not just saying, here's what we're in and we can't get out of this. We can change this. FDR said, man creates problems, man can change problems and solve problems. We have to believe that again. We have to have the confidence that this political system of ours isn't working the way we want it to, and it needs big, big changes.
And there are a lot of people in this country taking that advice right now as well. The new book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, is out today. You can bet it's worth your time if Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote it. Great
Thanks,
to see you,
Willie.
Doris. Thanks so much. And the new Yahoo series, When Presidents Lead, is out today as well. Daniel Kleidman, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Willie.
Coming up, President Trump fires another shot in his trade war with China. This morning, Beijing says it has no choice but to fire back. We'll discuss what this means for American consumers ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.